What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. Okay, so picking up with the epilogue of Super Sons Rebirth, it's really fun. I mean, dude, I love the whole idea of like Super Sons of Tomorrow, but I love the Teen Titans and the Super Sons comics. It's so fun. This is one of the things I really enjoy. I was never like a huge reader of Teen Titans. I mean, I watched the show back in the day, but I was never like an avid Teen Titans fan. And so for a lot of people who've been reading Teen Titans for years, I'm sure for a lot of you guys, this is just like, yeah, this isn't anything I haven't seen before. I love it, but I've seen all this before. But to me, it's brand new. This is all basically new stuff to me, and I love this whole thing. I especially love the character of Jonathan Kent. Jonathan Kent is definitely my favorite character in DC Rebirth. Like it's amazing how hilarious he is because he's just like a teen and he has fun and all that kind of stuff. But again, this is a really, really important moment because remember, in the last video, we had talked about how Tim Drake had come from the future as a byproduct of the fact that somewhere along the line, Jonathan Kent, Superman's son, would essentially develop his father's, or really, Superman's solar flare power, basically allowing him to kind of discharge this massive amount of solar energy due to the fact that Damian Wayne would betray him at some point. And so as a result, when he discharges all this solar energy, it would wipe out the city of Metropolis. It would kill like 1 million people. And then in turn, Superboy would just kind of become like, this character that everybody's looking for to kind of try to track down. But the whole idea of Tim Drake was to find a way to go back into the past and stop it from happening. So it was pretty cool for what it was because this version of Tim really became a much darker version of the character that he is now. But the fact remains here that when the kind of climax to the Super Sons of Tomorrow story happened and Jonathan Kent began to kind of emanate this solar flare power, essentially Tim Drake absorbed that energy and was then thrown into the time stream. And this is huge because again, this is one of those instances when DC gives us like these little flashbacks to basically tell us, here are the things that have happened and here are the things that haven't happened. So for example, I mean, you see from like this opening page here, this giant splash page, that things like Crisis on Infinite Earths happened. Things like, Infinite Crisis, Superboy Prime, that happened. But also DC Universe Rebirth #1, the events of Forever Evil, those things took place too. Now again, what I'm really expecting from DC, to kind of sidetrack here for a second, what I'm really expecting from DC is to give us this kind of 0-hour crisis in time event, which is to say, we might not necessarily get a crisis, but once the whole rebirth thing is basically done, which is to say, when we get an explanation of like what Dr. Manhattan did and how his actions impacted and changed everything, that it'll eventually segue into DC, most likely giving us like a timeline. Like basically, here are all the things that have happened that are in continuity. Like that's kind of what I expect to take place. But the fact remains here that at this point, Tim Drake, this future version of Tim Drake, is in the time stream. So basically he could be anywhere and at any point in time. We have no idea where he is. He could end up at any point from the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths all the way up to the modern day. So who knows when he would pop up. And it's cool because it allows DC to really offer, even if they wanted to, like an ongoing series or a mini series or something like that, where this future version of Tim Drake is he's our tour guide for the multiverse, or really for like the entire timeline of DC Comics. There's a lot of stuff that you can do. The other half of this is something that kind of caught me by surprise with this aftermath, this epilogue, is that we basically have the Titans of Tomorrow meeting the new superheroes, meaning the existing superheroes, the current Superman and, the Teen Titans and so on. Superman doesn't know who they are. And that's kind of the interesting thing. Remember this, on the surface, our initial response, if we've forgotten a couple of things, our initial response would be, but they should know each other. Like they should definitely know who the other is. And so again, I want to take this bit of a second, this little bit of an opportunity. I want to talk about Superman for a second. A lot of people are still a little bit confused about Superman Reborn. They're really just kind of confused about how that works and how the new Superman's origin story works and all that kind of good stuff. So to offer an explanation here, let's take DC Rebirth. When DC Rebirth kicked off, which is to say the release of DC Universe Rebirth #1, we had two Supermen in the main DC universe. We had the Superman that arose during the events of, the New 52, basically, when DC rebooted and said, we want you guys to treat superheroes like we've never published them before. We had this new, younger version of Superman, and then we had the classic Superman. And the whole idea with this is that it was DC basically saying, hey, look, somebody did something, somebody messed with things. Now, because of what's happened in DC Rebirth so far, what we can kind of presume here, and again, it's still a little bit fuzzy in terms of how it works. What we can kind of presume here is that when Flashpoint happened and, Barry Allen went back in time, saved his mom's life, and then went back in time and let her die after realizing how bad everything got and so on and so forth, Dr. Manhattan stepped in and messed with things. Presumably he made the new Superman, whatever the case may be. But the result here is that we ended up having this quote unquote new universe that existed. And then you had classic Superman Superman who basically left his universe and arrived in this one. And so that's how we had those two Supermen there. We basically had two versions of the same character who were just from two different universes, more or less, two different points in time. And the result was that with Superman Reborn, it was basically taking those two versions of Superman, bringing them together, and then just erasing the entire history of the individual characters. And so as it stands right now, with this version of Superman that we see here, this one in this story right now, and the one that we've seen after the events of Superman Reborn, basically, there is no classic Superman in the sense of like the death of Superman and all those old stories. There's also no new 52 Superman. What there is this Superman, and then whatever parts of his past DC wants to keep intact. So we know that this version died back in 1992, you know, in the death of Superman. That happened. He was killed by Doomsday. We know that those kind of events have taken place, and the new origin was given to us as part of the aftermath of Superman Reborn. So again, that's kind of what this version is supposed to be. In terms of the role he plays, he's basically classic Superman, but in terms of, you know, this being an exact copy, not necessarily the case. That classic Superman that we're familiar with, that one's basically gone. And this is kind of like a merged version of the two characters. Hopefully that makes sense to you guys. I don't really know how to explain it any clearer than that. So I don't know. You might have to kind of investigate outside of my videos in order to find a way that's more conducive to your ability to understand it. But the fact remains here, it is kind of cool because again, this is why this version of Superman doesn't know these Titans. Now, if Superman Reborn never happened and the new 52 Superman died and the classic Superman was here and his origin story was never rewritten, he would definitely know these characters. He would say, yeah, Connor Kent, I remember you. How come you don't remember me? You're basically a cloned version of me from when I died and Lex Luthor made you. How come you don't remember me? With Bart Allen, it would be like, yeah, I remember you. Like, you're the grandson of Barry Allen. You were brought to the 20th century because your powers were out of control, and then, you know, Wally West and a handful of others managed to find a way to keep him in check and basically set you back to know, I remember your whole past. I remember you when you were this tall. Like, I mean, I imagine that's how Superman would respond. But again, he doesn't necessarily have all the same memories, but we would kind of expect him to, you know, to a degree. But again, that's why it's so interesting, and that's why it's so intriguing, is because DC's very much playing it by ear. Now, even then, with like the character of Beast Boy, his initial response is, well, I feel like I know that girl Cassie Sandsmark. Like, I feel like we've met before. And this is really kind of like DC hitting home with the idea that maybe there is a connection here, that if Dr. Manhattan stepped in and modified everybody's memories and changed everything around and moved these pieces around the board in order to make it look different than it actually was, then maybe this effect is starting to wear off. But again, we can't really take that by just like one phrase, by one sentence from Beast Boy. We can't really ride that as an absolute certainty. At this point, it's just kind of like haphazard guessing. Now, the other funny thing about this is Kid Flash. I love Kid Flash. Love Kid Flash. He's almost as awesome as Jonathan Kent. And the funny thing about this is that where everybody's kind of talking about the aftermath and the Titans of tomorrow and whether or not they should ask about the future and if they should get answers and different things like that, Kid Flash's whole response is, hey, I got something better than anything we could have gotten. And when people are like, what? He's like, a selfie. Which is amazing because it's so easy to forget in this story that they are teenagers. I mean, they're just young kids. You know, they're kids just kind of having a great time being superheroes, also dealing with teenage issues. Raven gets pissed off and destroys the phone. It is pretty funny, you know, these little interactions, things like that. But the other half of this is that this basically picks up with the whole idea of Superman addressing the issue of Damian and Jonathan Kent. Because Superboy effectively sits down and says, okay, the whole reason Tim Drake came here is because some point along the line, Damian, you're gonna betray my son. And when you do, he's gonna lose his mind and he's gonna destroy Metropolis. So you guys can't be friends anymore. You guys can't hang out. And it's kind of interesting. This is actually a really interesting scenario. This is the perils of time travel. This is the danger of time travel. We don't have an answer to the question of if Superman lets them stay friends, is that what leads to the conflict? Or if Superman refuses to let them stay friends, is that what leads to the conflict? We don't know. We don't have an answer to that. We don't know which one of these paths leads to this massive calamity. Maybe they both do. I mean, sure, you know, an argument can be made. Well, you know, things have changed just by virtue of Tim Drake going into the past and, you know, encountering them and trying to stop them. But it doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. It could very well just happen by a different means. The circumstance could unfold in a similar way, just under something a little bit different, you know, different conditions, but the whole event remains. Maybe it's Gotham City that Jonathan blows up instead of Metropolis. That's the cool thing about this. And that's why this is interesting, because it does leave the question out there. Has the entire conflict been prevented? Now, for his defense here, Damian steps up. And this is a cool thing. This is why Jonathan as a character has such a great impact on Damian. For those people who have been reading DC Comics for quite some time, really, you know, with like Son of the Demon, going all the way back to the introduction of Damian Wayne, his character's evolved a lot over the years. When he first showed up, in fact, he pissed off a lot of Batman fans. When he first showed up, he was just this really entitled, spoiled kid who believed the world revolved around him. It was his way or the wrong way. And that's really how his character was initially. Now, over the years, as different writers have evolved his character, he's grown the way that you would expect him to. A lot of this has been a byproduct of Batman stepping in and Batman basically saying, look, our job is to protect people. Our job is not to kill people who do bad things. That's the easy way out. I mean, there's been a lot of work that's been done on behalf of like Batman's character to kind of flesh out Damian Wayne, but in terms of like him being more of a brighter spot, him kind of growing up and realizing he's not the center of the universe, a lot of that comes from Jonathan Kent, because Jonathan Kent's kind of like this immutable force of happiness that exists. That's why I love his character so much, because he's just a fun character to read about. And so that's why him and Damian Wayne get along so well, because it's almost like yin and yang. It's like oil and vinegar. It's light and dark. It's this cool thing where these two characters who you would never expect to be friends just immediately hit it off, and they have an amazing friendship. But in a lot of ways, whether Damian realizes it or not, Jonathan Kent helps to impact him and make him a better person. The other half of this is, remember, despite the fact that Damian Wayne does have a checkered past, and even though he does, has done some pretty shady things, he is an honorable guy. And so in his mind, it is basically, look, Jonathan's not just a potential member of the Teen Titans. He's not just a person that I've gone on adventures with. He's a friend. And where I come from, friends watch their friends' backs. That's very important. That's a very significant thing when it comes to his character, because it really hits the evolution of Damian Wayne as he's grown over the years. And so that's why it's so cool. So what they end up doing is basically calling a vote. And it's actually really funny because they're teleported to the Justice League Watchtower by Superman. And like their initial response is like, dude, we're in the Justice League Watchtower, man. Like, it's really funny. Like they're sitting down in like the big superheroes chairs. And it's funny because it's like, man, like we get to sit at the adult table. It's really, really interesting. And it's really intriguing because this again hits home at the idea that they're teenagers. They're having fun. It's what's so cool about that. That's why I love the Teen Titans so much. Now, of course, Damian's response is, okay, we basically got to call this to a vote. And Damian's in the corner of Jonathan Kent. He's like, look, let's make him a partial Titan at the very least. Now, even if it's only one of those circumstances where Damian's like, look, we got to keep an eye on Jonathan Kent just to make sure he doesn't lose his mind, it is cool because he is basically voting for Jonathan to be rolled in when Damian was staunchly against it initially. His whole stance was, you're not a teenager, you're a preteen, you're not old enough to be on the Teen Titans. Now, of course, this also sees the arrival of Batman, after having come to more or less after being defeated by Tim Drake, kind of knocked unconscious. And he basically says, okay, let's take a vote. And the result is that, everybody's kind of like, no, we're not really in favor of Jonathan Kent joining the Teen Titans. Now, it's not because they hate Jonathan, right? I mean, there may be a little bit of fear there, maybe a little bit of concern, but the bigger idea here is that when Tim Drake showed up, Tim Drake dismantled the Teen Titans so fast and so easily. Now, keep in mind, Batman Incorporated way back before the New 52, or I guess really it was Batman Incorporated when New 52 was launched. That basically confirmed that Tim Drake is probably the world's best detective, second only to Bruce Wayne. That he's beyond, Damian Wayne. He's beyond Dick Grayson. He's beyond Jason Todd in terms of his detective abilities. He's just below Bruce Wayne. And so it's not like they went against the Joker and the Joker just dismantled them, or the Riddler who tricked them. It's one of the best detectives out there who knows all their strengths and weaknesses because he came from the future. But it is cool because what this means is that the Teen Titans were effectively fighting a villain that could predict all their moves before they made them. And so in order to basically be that much better, they have to be quote unquote unpredictable, which is to say they have to have a better understanding of each other. They have to know what all their strengths and weaknesses are. Now, this is not accidental. It's not like DC put this in there just for the sake of just having it in there. Way back in when the Justice League was first launched back in 1960, one of the first things the Justice League did in order to instill trust in each member of the team was to reveal their identities to each other. To basically say like, here's our secret identities. I Batman am Bruce Wayne. I Superman am Clark Kent. I Wonder Woman am Diana Prince. I the Flash am Barry Allen. It was cool to see that kind of thing because it instilled trust. Now, this is why this is done. It's a homage to the old school Justice League story, but it's designed to hit home with the idea that the only way to really know someone is to let your guard down. It's to basically say, okay, all my cards are on the table. I'm not holding anything back. They might accept you, they might reject you, but you have no regrets under the circumstances. And that's what the Teen Titans have to do. They got to throw their cards out there. They got to just spill out their strengths, their weaknesses, their fears, their hopes, their desires, and make themselves stronger as a team. So that instead of viewing each other as just people who fight alongside other people, they view themselves as a family, that they're invested in each other because they find a common connectivity, they find a common theme, something that unites them under a singular banner. And until they're able to do that on their own, there's no room for new additions. And so the result is that Jonathan Kent is basically sit on the sidelines and he's effectively not allowed into the Teen Titans. So again, that's really how this epilogue ends. And it's a great epilogue to this whole thing. I love this story. It's a great little follow-up, great little aftermath. But if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoy this video, make sure you drop a like and I will catch you all later. Peace.